The fluorescent lights of the corporate lobby hummed, a flat, sterile sound that did nothing to fill the cavernous space. It was a place of polished marble and hushed tones, a cathedral dedicated to commerce, where men in tailored suits spoke in acronyms and ambition was the only sanctioned currency. An old man stood near the security desk, a stark contrast to the sleek environment. His name was Elias, and he was a janitor. He was not invisible, but he was unseen. His back, stooped from decades of labor, his hands, gnarled and thick-knuckled, and the slight, almost imperceptible limp in his right leg, all marked him as part of the building's machinery, as functional and unregarded as the elevators or the HVAC system. He held a worn leather wallet, its seams frayed, its surface softened to the texture of a cherished memory. Inside was a single creased photograph of a young man with Elias's eyes, smiling in a crisp uniform and a small, heavy coin. The security guard, a young man named Kevin, barely looked up from his phone. "Can I help you, old man?" he asked, the words clipped impatient. Elias cleared his throat, a dry, raspy sound. "I'm here to see my son." "Daniel." He said the name with a quiet pride that was lost on the guard. Kevin sighed, a gust of put-upon exasperation. "Daniel who?" "This is a big company. Lots of Daniels." Elias provided the last name, the floor, the department. Kevin's fingers tapped on a keyboard, his expression a mask of bureaucratic boredom. "He's in a meeting. You'll have to wait." Elias nodded, understanding. He knew about meetings. He had spent a lifetime on the periphery of them, emptying the trash cans of men who decided the fates of others. He found a hard bench against the far wall and sat, his worn work boots planted firmly on the gleaming floor. He was just a father, waiting for his son. But what no one in that lobby knew, what the dismissive guard and the hurrying executives couldn't possibly comprehend, was the history etched into the lines on Elias's face, the weight of the secrets he carried in his silent heart, and the true meaning of the faded tattoo partially hidden beneath the cuff of his worn work shirt, a coiled snake encircling a pair of crossed arrows. They saw a janitor. They were about to learn they were wrong. Welcome to our channel. If you believe in honoring our quiet heroes and revealing the strength that lies in humility, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell for more stories that matter. The text message had arrived an hour ago, a cold, digital slap. "Don't join us, Dad. It's a corporate dinner. You wouldn't be comfortable." Elias had read it, his thumb hovering over the screen. He hadn't replied. There was nothing to say. He knew what his son meant. He, with his calloused hands and simple clothes, would be an anomaly, a smudge on the pristine surface of his son's new world. Daniel was a rising star at Ethelred Global, a company whose name was whispered with a kind of reverence in the financial world. He was smart, ambitious, and increasingly ashamed of the simple man who had raised him. The dinner was to celebrate a major acquisition, a triumph for Daniel's team. Elias hadn't wanted to intrude, only to see him, to congratulate him in person. He had a small gift, the heavy coin from his wallet, a challenge coin. One wasn't flashy, just a piece of bronze with an odd crest, but it meant more to Elias than anything this company could ever acquire. The antagonists in the silent drama were not just Daniel's well-meaning, but misguided sense of propriety. They were the very walls of this building, the culture it represented. They were the young, arrogant executives who strode past Elias's bench without a glance, their conversations a flurry of buzzwords and casual condescension. One of them, a man named Marcus with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile, paused, his eyes sweeping over Elias with disdain. He leaned over to his companion. "They really let anyone in here, don't they?" he murmured, just loud enough for Elias to hear. The companion chuckled. "Must be lost. Or maybe he's here to fix a toilet." Elias's jaw tightened, but his expression remained unchanged. He had faced far worse than the callow insults of office princelings. He had faced men whose eyes held real malice, in places where a sharp tongue was the least of his worries. His silence was not weakness. It was a discipline, forged in the crucible of a life they could never imagine. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just waited. The weight of the coin in his pocket was a familiar comfort, a tangible link to a world of honor and sacrifice that was a universe away from this glass and steel tower. It was a world where a man's worth was measured not by his title or his bonus, but by his courage and his word. A world he had left behind, but that had never truly left him. The inciting incident, the moment the quiet tension would begin its slow, inexorable climb to a shattering climax, was not loud or violent. It was a small act of public humiliation, delivered with the casual cruelty of the privileged. Daniel, his son, finally emerged from the elevator, flanked by Marcus and another senior executive. He looked flushed with success, his posture confident, his suit immaculate. He saw his father on the bench, and for a fleeting, terrible moment, a flicker of irritation crossed his face before being quickly masked by a practiced, professional smile. "Dad," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought I texted." The words were a public disavowal, a clear signal to his colleagues that this old man, this janitor, was an unexpected and slightly embarrassing inconvenience. Marcus's smug smile widened. "This is your father, Dan? How quaint." He extended a hand, not in greeting, but as a gesture of condescending inspection. "So, you're the man who raised our wunderkind." Elias met his gaze, his own eyes as steady and unyielding as ancient stone. He did not take the offered hand. He simply looked at his son. "Congratulations on the deal, Daniel." His voice was quiet, yet it seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the lobby. It held no anger, only a profound and weary disappointment that was far more damning. Daniel shifted, his discomfort palpable. "Thanks, Dad. Look, now's not a great time. We have this big dinner." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the exit, a silent plea for his father to understand, to simply disappear. The humiliation was compounded by the arrival of the head of corporate security, a self-important man named Henderson, alerted by the young guard at the desk who had decided Elias's silent presence was somehow a threat. Henderson was a man who wielded his minimal authority like a scepter. "Sir," he began, his tone dripping with false politeness, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private building, for employees and authorized guests only." He looked from Elias's worn boots to his simple jacket, his judgment clear. Elias was not authorized. He was not one of them. The injustice was a tightening knot in Elias's chest. He had built his life on a foundation of service and sacrifice, asking for nothing in return. 2, he had given his son everything, had worked his fingers to the bone so that Daniel could have the life he now so proudly flaunted. And in this gleaming monument to his son's success, he was being treated as a trespasser, an object of scorn and suspicion. He looked at Daniel, a silent question in his eyes. "Will you speak for me? Will you defend me?" But Daniel remained silent, his gaze averted, trapped between the father who raised him and the bosses he sought to impress. The choice was made. The battle lines were drawn. The silence in the lobby stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. The arrogance of the executives, the cowardice of the son, the blind authority of the security chief. It all swirled around Elias, a vortex of disrespect. He remained seated, a lone, unmovable island in a sea of contempt. He had been challenged. He had been dismissed. He had been humiliated. The rising action had begun, and the quiet janitor, the unassuming father, would now endure the escalating storm with the same silent dignity that had defined his entire life. He had learned long ago that the quietest men often carry the loudest histories. And the history of Elias was about to be brought into the light. The air in the lobby grew thick with a tense, expectant stillness. The initial scene of disrespect began to draw a small, curious audience. A few administrative assistants, their tasks momentarily forgotten, watched from behind their desks. A junior analyst, a young man named Ben, who often exchanged a quiet, respectful nod with Elias in the early morning hours, stood near the elevators, a frown creasing his brow. Ben was the observer, the audience surrogate. He had always sensed a depth in the old janitor, a stillness that wasn't just about age, but about a profound, internal discipline. He had once seen Elias effortlessly hoist a massive, waterlogged bag of trash onto his cart, a feat of strength that seemed at odds with his stooped posture. And he had noticed a tattoo, just a glimpse of it, the tail of a serpent and the fletching of an arrow, before Elias's sleeve had covered it. Ben knew enough about military insignia to be intrigued, to suspect that the old man was more than he appeared. The antagonist, emboldened by Daniel's passive complicity, escalated their mockery. Marcus, the executive, circled Elias's bench like a predator. "So, what's your story, old-timer?" he drawled, his voice laced with insincere curiosity. "You a veteran? Fought in the big one? Vietnam? Or maybe you were a cook in the mess hall? Rambo, here looks like he's seen some things." He chuckled at his own wit, and a few of his sycophantic colleagues joined in. Elias's eyes, which had been fixed on his son, slowly shifted to Marcus. They were cold now, flat and devoid of any emotion. It was a look that could freeze fire, a look that had been perfected in places where a single, misplaced emotion could mean death. He spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Once," he said. The single word hung in the air, a stark, minimalist rebuttal that offered nothing and yet hinted at everything. The brevity of the reply, its stoic finality, seemed to momentarily throw Marcus off his rhythm. He had expected a story, a boast, a justification. He had expected the old man to engage, to defend himself, to play the part of the disrespected veteran seeking validation. Elias did none of these things. He simply was. The security chief, Henderson, puffed out his chest, reasserting his authority. "That's enough. Sir, I'm not going to ask you again. You are causing a disturbance. Move along now." He placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, a gesture of physical enforcement. The moment his fingers made contact, Elias moved. It wasn't a fast movement, nor was it aggressive. It was fluid, efficient, a seamless transfer of energy. He didn't shrug off the hand. He simply shifted his weight, rotating his shoulder in a way that caused Henderson's grip to slide off harmlessly. At the same time, his own hand came up, not to strike, but to gently, almost academically, tap Henderson's wrist at precise pressure point. Henderson yelped, a jolt of sharp, numbing pain shooting up his arm. He stumbled back, shaking his hand, his face a mass of shock and confusion. "What the—" No one moved. Silence. The lobby, which had been a stage for quiet mockery, was now a frozen tableau. The executives stared, their smirks gone. Daniel's face was pale, a dawning horror in his eyes as he realized he had profoundly misjudged the situation. Ben, the young analyst, felt a jolt of vindication. He knew it. He knew there was more to this man. The disrespect had reached its peak. The antagonists, in their arrogant ignorance, had poked the bear one too many times. They had mistaken quiet for weakness, humility for insignificance. They had treated a man of immense, hidden honor as a piece of refuse to be swept away. And now, the quiet had been broken, not by a shout, but by a single, precise movement that spoke volumes. It spoke of training, of discipline, of a latent power that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted irrevocably. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, no longer just social awkwardness, but something more primal. It was a feeling of having stumbled into a place where the old rules no longer applied, where the hierarchy of suits and titles was suddenly, shockingly, irrelevant. All eyes were on the old janitor, who sat calmly on the bench, his hands resting on his knees, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The storm had gathered, and the lightning was about to strike. The climax arrived not with bang, but with the sound of heavy, polished boots striking the marble floor in perfect, rhythmic unison. The main doors of the Ethelred Global Tower swished open, and a wave of palpable authority washed into the lobby, silencing the remaining whispers and freezing everyone in place. For men entered, walking in a tight, diamond formation. They were not dressed in corporate attire. They wore dark, functional suits, but their bearing, their posture, their very presence screamed military precision. They moved with an economy of motion that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Leading them was a man with silver hair, a ramrod-straight back, and a kind of face that seemed carved from granite. On the lapel of his perfectly tailored jacket was a small, discreet pin, a gold eagle, the insignia of a full colonel. He was flanked by 3 younger men, their faces hard and watchful, their eyes constantly scanning the room, assessing every person, every angle, every potential threat. They were a living, breathing embodiment of lethal competence. The arrival was a visual shockwave. The camera would pan slowly up from their gleaming boots, tracing the sharp creases in their trousers, lingering on the quiet confidence in their hands, and finally settling on the face of the colonel, his eyes the color of a winter sky, swept across the lobby, taking in the scene with a single, all-encompassing glance. The stunned executives, the flustered security chief clutching his wrist, the pale, horrified face of Daniel, and finally, the old man sitting quietly on the bench. The colonel's hard expression softened, melting away to be replaced by one of profound, absolute reverence. The four men did not stop, did not hesitate. They walked directly toward the bench, their path cleaving through the frozen onlookers like a ship through ice. They stopped as one, directly in front of Elias. Silence descended, heavy and complete. Then the colonel spoke, his voice a clear, authoritative baritone that filled the cavernous lobby, a voice accustomed to command, a voice that had sent men into battle and brought them home again. "Sir," he said, the word infused with respect so deep it was almost a physical force. He was not addressing a CEO or a chairman. He was addressing the stooped, elderly janitor in the worn work clothes. He then delivered the monologue, the reveal that would shatter the world of everyone present. "We were told you were in the city. We've been looking for you, Sergeant Major." He paused, letting the title hang in the air, a grenade of revelation. Marcus and his friends exchanged confused, slack-jawed glances. Sergeant Major? This old janitor? It was impossible. The colonel's eyes found Daniel's, and for a moment they held a flicker of cold fire. Then he turned his attention back to Elias, his voice taking on a reverent, storytelling cadence. "For those of you who do not know," he began, his voice projecting to every corner of the lobby, ensuring every single person heard, "you are in the presence of Elias Vance, a man who, for 30 years, was a ghost, a whisper in the darkest corners of the world, a man who served as the command sergeant major for the 7th Special Forces Group." He gestured to the faded tattoo on Elias's arm, now clearly visible. "For the insignia of the Green Berets, for men who are known as the quiet professionals." 3. The colonel's gaze swept over the arrogant executives, lingering on Marcus. "You see a janitor. I see a man who led a team on Operation Silent Alone, a deep-cover mission in the Hindu Kush so classified that most of the official records were burned. He and his 5-man team held off a force of over 200 insurgents for 3 days, with no support, protecting a downed pilot. He carried that pilot, a man twice his size, for 2 days through enemy territory on a broken leg. The same leg," the colonel's voice dropped, becoming thick with emotion, "that still causes him pain today." He then looked directly at Henderson, the security chief. "The move he used on you? That's a nerve strike technique taught only to Tier 1 operators. He could have crippled you. He chose not to. That is the discipline of a warrior, a discipline you clearly lack." The colonel then reached into his own pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, identical to the one Elias carried. 5. He held it up for all to see. "This coin is given only to those who have served with the highest distinction, for acts of valor that go above and beyond the call of duty. It is a symbol of honor, of brotherhood, of a debt that can never be repaid." 6. He placed the coin on the bench next to Elias. Then, in a move that sent a gasp through the lobby, the full colonel and his 3 elite operators, these hard, dangerous men, stood at perfect attention. And they saluted, not a casual salute, but a sharp, precise, full-dress salute, a gesture of ultimate respect, from the highest echelons of the military to a humble janitor. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been utterly annihilated. The polished marble floor of Ethelred Global had become a sacred space, a stage for the revelation of a true American hero. The quiet man on the bench was a legend, and his name was Elias Vance. The aftermath of the colonel's speech was a vacuum of profound, crushing silence. The salute held for a long, pregnant moment, a silent testament to a lifetime of sacrifice that had been lived in the shadows. The antagonists, Marcus and his cohort of executives, were statues of shame. Their faces, once masked of smug superiority, were now pale and slack-jawed. The color had drained from Marcus's face, leaving behind a sickly, grayish pallor. His eyes, which had held such casual cruelty, were now wide with dawning, horrified understanding. He looked from the saluting colonel to the old janitor, and for the first time, he truly saw him. He saw the strength in the stooped shoulders, the history in the gnarled hands, the unyielding honor in the steady gaze. He saw not a toilet cleaner, but a titan. The shame was a physical thing, a heavy cloak that settled over him, suffocating his arrogance. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to offer some pathetic excuse, but no words came. His throat was dry, his tongue thick with the bitter taste of his own ignorance. He simply shrank, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a clown's costume. Henderson, the security chief, fared no better. He stood cradling his wrist, his face a mixture of fear and humiliation. He, a man who prided himself on his authority, had been publicly and effortlessly neutralized, then verbally dissected by a man whose presence commanded more respect than Henderson could ever hope to achieve. His authority was a joke, a flimsy shield that had been shattered by the quiet dignity of a true warrior. He avoided the colonel's gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor, wishing it would swallow him whole. Daniel, the son, was the epicenter of the emotional fallout. He was broken. The colonel's words had been a fusillade, each one a direct hit to his conscience. He carried that pilot on a broken leg. The limp he had always seen as a sign of old age, of weakness. The limp his father never once complained about. It was a badge of honor, a testament to a heroism he had been too blind, too self-absorbed to ever see. The text message, "Don't join us, Dad. You wouldn't be comfortable," now burned in his memory like a brand of shame. He hadn't been protecting his father. He had been protecting his own fragile, pathetic ego. He had been ashamed of the very man who was the source of all his strength, all his opportunity. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He looked at his father, truly looked at him, and saw the quiet, unwavering love that had always been there, a love he had so casually, so cruelly betrayed. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful. He took a hesitant step forward, his hand outstretched, but he stopped. What could he say? What apology could possibly suffice? The chasm between them seemed immense, unbridgeable, carved out by his own selfish pride. Elias finally lowered his head in a slight, acknowledging nod. The colonel and his men crisply dropped their salutes. The tension in the lobby began to recede, replaced by a thick, heavy atmosphere of awe and regret. Ben, the young analyst, felt his eyes sting. He felt a fierce, protective pride for the old man he had always respected. He looked at the executives, at Daniel, and felt a quiet contempt. They had been given a gift, the presence of a man like Elias Vance, and they had spit on it. He hoped the lesson they had just learned would stay with them forever. Elias's honor, once questioned and mocked, was now restored, gleaming and undeniable, filling the entire space with its quiet, powerful light. The falling action was complete. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wreckage of arrogance and the quiet, unshakable truth of a hero's worth. The resolution was as quiet and unassuming as the hero himself. Elias Vance, the command sergeant major, the legend, did not revel in his vindication. He did not lecture or gloat. He did not wait for the apologies that were now forming on the trembling lips of the men who had scorned him. He simply stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, the familiar ache in his leg a quiet reminder of a life lived for others. He looked at the colonel, his old friend, and a silent communication passed between them, a shared history, a mutual respect that needed no words. He gave a single, small nod. It was enough. Then he turned his gaze to his son. Daniel stood frozen, tears streaming down his face, a portrait of abject misery and regret. He looked like a little boy again, lost and ashamed. Elias walked toward him, his limp more pronounced. Now, each step a testament to the pain he had endured, both on the battlefield and in this very lobby. He did not embrace his son. He did not offer words of forgiveness. He simply reached out his gnarled hand and gently, firmly, placed a heavy challenge coin into Daniel's trembling palm. He made it, Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He was referring to the pilot he had saved, but the words held a double meaning. Daniel had made it, too. He had reached the pinnacle of the world he had chosen, even if he had lost his way in the process. With that, Elias turned and walked toward the glass doors, his worn work boots making soft, rhythmic sounds on the marble floor. He didn't look back. He was a quiet professional, a man who did his duty and then left, seeking no fanfare, no ceremony, no thanks. 7, he had come congratulate his son, and in his own way he had. He had given him a far greater gift than congratulations. He had given him the truth. He had given him a chance to remember who he was, and from where he came. The colonel and his team watched him go, their faces etched with profound respect. Then the colonel turned his cold, appraising gaze back to the occupant of the lobby. He looked at the humbled executives, at the shaken security guard, and finally at Daniel, who was staring at the coin in his hand as if it were the heaviest object in the world. The colonel didn't need to say another word. The lesson had been delivered. True honor is not found in a title or a bank account. It is forged in fire, earned through sacrifice and worn with humility. It is the quiet strength of men like Elias Vance, the invisible heroes who walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight. The true measure of man is not the height of his ambition, but the depth of his character. As Elias disappeared onto the busy street, the gleaming corporate lobby felt emptier than before, its sterile perfection somehow diminished by the departure of the simple, honest soul who had, for a brief, stunning moment, filled it with the weight of true honor. The narrative had come full circle, leaving a profound and lasting reflection on the nature of respect, the blindness of arrogance, and the quiet, enduring power of a humble hero. The aftermath in the Ethelred Global Lobby was a slow, painful return to reality for those who had witnessed the revelation. It was as if a spell had been broken, leaving behind a residue of shame and a stark, uncomfortable clarity. Daniel stood motionless for a long time, the bronze challenge coin growing warm in his sweaty palm. 8. Its weight felt immense, a physical manifestation of the paternal legacy he had so carelessly dishonored. He could feel the intricate details under his thumb, the embossed crest of the 7 Special Forces Group, the crossed arrows and dagger, the motto de oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. 9. A motto his father had lived, not just spoken. 9. He finally looked up, his eyes scanning the faces around him. He saw the averted gazes of Marcus and the other executives, their arrogance replaced by a craven desire to be anywhere else. He saw the genuine, empathetic sorrow in the eyes of Ben, the young analyst, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of support. And he saw Henderson, the security chief, now being quietly spoken by one of the colonel's men, his face ashen. The colonel himself was watching Daniel, his expression unreadable, but his disappointment a palpable force. Daniel's world had been recalibrated in the most brutal way imaginable. His entire sense of self, built on corporate ladders and quarterly reports, felt like a house of cards. He thought of his father's life, the quiet mornings, the long hours of physical labor, the refusal to ever complain. He had mistaken that silence for simplicity, that humility for a lack of ambition. He now understood it was a quiet confidence of a man who had faced the ultimate test and had nothing left to prove to anyone, least of all the posturing peacocks in this lobby. The text message echoed in his mind, each word a separate indictment. "Don't join us, Dad." He had pushed away the one person in the world who defined true strength, true success. The dinner, the celebration, the acquisition, it all turned to ash in his mouth. He walked over to the colonel, the coin clutched in his hand. "Sir," he began, his voice cracking, will he be okay?" The colonel's gaze softened slightly. "Your father is one of the toughest men I have ever known. He has survived things that would break most people. He will be fine. The question is, will you?" Daniel had no answer. He could only nod, the shame of physical weight on his shoulders. He knew what he had to do. It was not about salvaging his career or his reputation in this building. It was about trying somehow to be worthy of the man who had just walked out the door. It would be a long road back, a journey of 1,000 apologies, beginning with the one he had to make to himself. The resolution was not one of celebration, but of somber reflection. The lesson was stark and unforgiving. We often fail to see the giants who walk among us, mistaking their quiet humility for ordinary weakness. We chase the glittering mirage of success, forgetting the bedrock of character upon which all true achievement is built. Elias Vance, the janitor, the father, the hero, had left the building, but his presence would linger in that lobby forever, a silent reminder that honor needs no introduction, and true strength never has to raise its voice. The scene in the lobby began to dissipate, not with a sudden rush, but with a slow, awkward shuffle, as if everyone was waking from a strange and powerful dream. The executives, led by a hen-faced Marcus, mumbled their excuses and scurried towards the elevators, their earlier bravado replaced by a desperate need to escape the lingering judgment in the air. Henderson, the security chief, was officially relieved of his duties for the evening by the colonel's men, a quiet but firm dismissal that signaled the end of his inflated authority. Daniel remained, a solitary figure in the vast, opulent space, the challenge coin still in his hand. He looked at the main entrance, the glass doors through which his father had departed, and felt a profound, aching loss. It wasn't just that his father was gone. It was the realization that he had never truly known him. He had seen the surface, the janitor, the old man with a limp, but he had been blind to the depths of heroism that lay beneath. He finally turned to Ben, the young analyst, who had remained a respectful distance away. "Did you know?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. Ben shook his head. "No, not really. I always knew he was more. You can tell, sometimes, the way a man carries himself, the look in his eyes. There was a stillness about him, a kind of peace. A peace born from enduring the storm, Daniel thought. A peace he now felt was a million miles away. The colonel approached, his duty done. He gave Daniel a long, hard look. "Your father never spoke of his service," he said, his voice softer now. "That's common for men like him. They don't see it as something to boast about. They see it as a duty that was done, a promise that was kept. The motto of the Special Forces is de oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. 9, he spent his life fighting for others. He never asked for anything in return, not even respect from his own son." The words were a final, sharp twist of the knife, but they were true, and Daniel needed to hear them. "Thank you, sir," Daniel managed to say, "for everything." The colonel simply nodded. Then he and his team turned and exited the building with the same quiet, intimidating efficiency with which they had arrived. The lobby was finally empty, save for Daniel and Ben. The silence was no longer tense, but reflective. Daniel looked down at the coin, its bronze surface gleaming under the cold, fluorescent lights. It was more than a piece of metal. It was an inheritance, a legacy of quiet strength and unspoken sacrifice. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life had been irrevocably altered. The path he had been on, the one paved with ambition and status, now seemed hollow and meaningless. His father had shown him what true wealth was, and it had nothing to do with the numbers on a balance sheet. It was about honor, courage, and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. The aftermath of that day rippled through Ethelred, global and quiet, significant ways. The story of the janitor and the colonel spread to the office building not as gossip, but as a kind of modern fable, a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and over email. Marcus, the arrogant executive, was never quite the same. The swagger was gone, replaced by a more subdued, cautious demeanor. He was seen, on more than one occasion, holding the door for the cleaning staff, a small but telling change. He had looked into the abyss of his own ignorance and been humbled by what he saw. Daniel, however, underwent the most profound transformation. The next morning, he walked into the office of the CEO, a man who had previously been an almost mythical figure to him. He didn't go to discuss his career or the recent acquisition. He went to resign. He explained that he needed to reevaluate his priorities, to understand what was truly important in life. The CEO, who had heard the story, simply nodded and accepted his resignation without question. Some things, it turned out, were more important than business. Daniel's journey of redemption was long and difficult. It began with a drive to his father's small, simple house in a quiet, working-class neighborhood. He found Elias in the backyard, tending to his small vegetable garden, his back to the world, as always. Daniel stood there for a long time, watching a man who was both a complete stranger and the most familiar person in his life. He finally found his voice, not the smooth, confident tone of a corporate executive, but a hesitant, cracking voice of a son who had lost his way. Dad, he said. Elias slowly straightened up, wincing slightly as he put a hand to his lower back. He turned, his face unreadable. He did not smile, but the coldness was gone from his eyes. Daniel walked forward, holding out the challenge coin. One, I don't deserve this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to. Elias looked at the coin, then at his son's tear-streaked face. He reached out, not to take the coin, but to place his rough, callous hand on Daniel's shoulder. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The gesture was one of acceptance, of forgiveness, of a love that ran deeper than any disappointment. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. One built not on assumptions and shame, but on the hard-won truth of who they were. The quiet professional and his humbled son, finally seeing each other for the very first time. The lesson lingered long after the story ended, a powerful reminder to look beyond the surface, to honor the quiet heroes who walk among us, and to never, ever mistake humility for weakness. The story of Elias and Daniel Vance became a quiet legend, not just within the walls of a corporation, but in the hearts of those who heard it. It served as a powerful testament to the fact that heroism isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a banner. Sometimes it carries a mop and pail. Sometimes it limps. Sometimes its greatest battles are fought in silence, and its greatest victories are the quiet moments of integrity that no one ever sees. Daniel's path forward was not easy. He had to dismantle the life he had so carefully constructed, piece by piece. He sold his expensive condo, traded his luxury car for a simple truck, and began to volunteer at a local veteran center. It was there, listening to the stories of other men and women who had served in silence, that he began to truly understand the world his father came from. He learned the language of sacrifice, the grammar of honor. He saw the invisible wounds they carried, the quiet pride they held. He started to see his father in all of them. He and Elias began to rebuild their relationship, not with grand gestures, but with small, quiet moments. They would work in the garden together, the silence between them no longer awkward, but comfortable, companionable. Daniel would listen, truly listen, as his father occasionally shared a memory, not of war, but of the camaraderie, the brotherhood. 70 never spoke of the missions, of the violence, of the things that haunted the darkest hours of the night. He spoke of the men he served with, the bonds forged in shared hardship, the simple, profound loyalty of watching each other's backs. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel finally asked a question that had been burning in his mind. Why, Dad? Why did you never tell me? Elias was silent for a long time, watching the colors fade from the sky. There was nothing to tell, he said finally. It was a job, a duty. My life wasn't about what I did over there. My life was about making sure you never had to. That was my most important mission. In that moment, Daniel understood everything. His father's entire life had been an act of service, an act of protection, aimed at him. The 30 years of covert operations, the pain, the sacrifice, it had all been for him. The quiet janitor was not just a hero, he was his hero. The greatest honor of his life, he realized, was not the career he had built, but the simple, profound fact that he was Elias Vance's son. The narrative concludes, not on a battlefield or in a corporate boardroom, but on a quiet porch, with the unspoken understanding between a father and a son. It is a resolution that champions the humble, honors the silent, and reminds us that the most powerful legacies are not written in stone, but are etched into the hearts of those we love. What does true honor mean to you? Is it defined by public recognition or by the quiet integrity of one's actions? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share with others. There are heroes all around us. We just need to learn how to see them.